In the autumn of 1777, York, Pennsylvania, became a temporary seat of American governance as Continental authorities withdrew from Philadelphia, carrying records, presses, and committees across the Susquehanna, seeking distance from British occupation and continuity of administration's civil order. The borough's position west of the river provided a defensible corridor, with ferry crossings controlled and key roads linking Lancaster, Carlisle, and the frontier, enabling communication lines to function while the main port city remained under British military pressure. The Continental Congress convened in York's courthouse and nearby buildings, where delegates continued legislative work, issuing resolutions, managing wartime logistics, and coordinating with General Washington, despite shortages of paper, currency instability, and the constant uncertainty imposed by a mobile conflict. Local households absorbed officials and clerks, transforming domestic spaces into offices, kitchens into provisioning centers, and workshops into print sites, illustrating how civic life adapted rapidly when imperial authority receded and revolutionary administration required immediate, practical local accommodations. Printers in York produced broadsides and official documents, disseminating congressional decisions and military notices, while couriers carried copies along established routes, binding dispersed communities into a shared informational network essential for sustaining morale and coordinated action wartime efforts. Currency depreciation complicated procurement, as Continental bills lost value, forcing Congress to requisition supplies and negotiate credit with local farmers and merchants, thereby linking York's immediate economy to the broader fiscal experiment of a nascent republic under severe strain. Militia units organized across York County, drilling intermittently and guarding large depots, while state authorities coordinated quotas and equipment, reflecting a decentralized military structure that relied on local compliance and periodic mobilization rather than continuous professional standing forces. York's geography, situated between fertile hinterlands and key crossings, allowed effectively grain, livestock, and iron goods to flow toward regional army encampments, illustrating how proximity to resources and routes determined which towns could temporarily assume central administrative core functions. During this period, Congress adopted the Articles of Confederation in York, outlining a framework for intercolonial governance that emphasized state sovereignty and limited central authority, a design shaped by wartime necessity and prevailing distrust of concentrated political power. Social relations adjusted as refugees, soldiers, and officials mingled with established residents, creating friction over prices, housing, and authority, yet often also fostering practical networks of cooperation that sustained shared daily life under conditions of uncertainty and administrative improvisation. Religious congregations maintained routines, offering spaces for public communication and relief, while also reinforcing moral frameworks that leaders believed essential for civic discipline, illustrating how institutional continuity underpinned broader political resilience during temporary displacement of formal governmental centers. Artisans expanded production of wagons, shoes, and tools, responding to military demand, while shortages of imported goods encouraged substitution and repair, integrating York's local workshops into a wartime economy that prioritized durability, transport, and immediate utility over practical refinement. After British forces evacuated Philadelphia in 1778, Congress prepared to return, marking the end of York's brief tenure as capital, yet leaving behind administrative habits and networks that would influence how Pennsylvania communities interacted with state and national authorities. The departure reduced demand for lodging and supplies, easing pressures on residents, but also contracting local markets that had expanded during occupation, demonstrating how wartime influxes could temporarily stimulate economies before reverting as political centers shifted location again. State government functions continued in Pennsylvania, with York remaining a county hub, administering courts, taxes, and records, while adapting to post-war demobilization, as veterans returned and officials recalibrated obligations, enforcement, and revenue collection within a peacetime legal new framework. Transportation routes regained commercial patterns, moving produce to eastern markets, while ironworks supplied regional demand, indicating an overall rebalancing from military provisioning toward civilian trade, though credit constraints and specie shortages continued to limit expansion across rural districts. The Articles of Confederation framework, advanced in York, later revealed significant limits in coordinating taxation and interstate policy, contributing to debates that would culminate in eventual calls for constitutional revision, linking York's legislative moment to broader national institutional development. Local society absorbed returning populations, adjusting land use, labor allocation, and family economies, while civic institutions resumed gradually regular schedules, demonstrating continuity after disruption and the capacity of small towns to stabilize governance once extraordinary pressures diminished again. Education and print culture persisted, with schools reopening and presses continuing pamphlets, almanacs, and laws, reinforcing literacy and shared norms, while also preserving records of York's congressional period that later historians would consult to reconstruct decisions, procedures, and local participation. County courts addressed disputes arising from wartime contracts and debts, setting precedents for enforcement in a recovering economy, as judges balanced equitable considerations with statutory requirements, reflecting the gradual reassertion of predictable legal processes after emergency governance conditions. York's experience illustrated how mid-sized inland towns could scale administrative capacity under pressure, leveraging geography, networks, and local compliance, yet also highlighted vulnerabilities in finance and coordination that would inform subsequent future institutional reforms at state and national levels. Between 1777 and 1790, York transitioned from emergency capital to county center, leaving a record of adaptive governance, economic recalibration, and social adjustment that contributed to the evolving structure of the early United States without retaining national prominence.
After the return of Congress to Philadelphia in 1778, York resumed its role as a regional administrative center, no longer a national capital, yet still shaped by the institutional practices and logistical adaptations developed during its period of extraordinary political responsibility. Local governance stabilized as county officials reasserted routine authority over taxation, property records, and judicial proceedings, reflecting a broader transition across Pennsylvania from wartime improvisation toward more predictable civil administration grounded in established legal frameworks and community expectations. Agricultural production regained priority, with farmers focusing on wheat, corn, and livestock for regional markets, while reduced military demand altered pricing structures, illustrating how wartime economic surges could recede quickly, requiring households to adjust strategies for income stability and resource allocation. Trade routes connecting York to Baltimore, Lancaster, and Carlisle became increasingly important, facilitating exchange of goods and information, and reinforcing the town's geographic role as a connector between inland agricultural zones and emerging commercial centers along the Chesapeake and eastern seaboard. Merchants adapted to fluctuating currency conditions, as continental paper lost credibility and specie remained scarce, forcing reliance on barter, credit arrangements, and local trust networks, which collectively sustained commerce despite persistent instability in the broader post-war financial environment. Iron production in nearby districts contributed tools, nails, and equipment essential for reconstruction and farming, integrating York into a wider material economy where regional specialization supported gradual recovery from wartime disruptions affecting both infrastructure and productive capacity. Population patterns shifted as some wartime migrants departed while others settled permanently, leading to adjustments in housing, labor distribution, and community organization, reflecting the long-term demographic effects of temporary political concentration within a relatively small inland borough. Social hierarchies evolved subtly, as individuals who had engaged with congressional administration or supply networks gained influence, demonstrating how wartime service and connections could translate into post-war status within local political and economic structures. Religious institutions continued to anchor community life, offering continuity amid change, while also engaging in charitable efforts for widows, veterans, and the poor, highlighting the interplay between moral authority and social welfare in sustaining stability during transitional years. Educational activity expanded modestly, with schools emphasizing literacy and arithmetic necessary for commerce and governance, reinforcing the importance of informed citizenry within a republic increasingly dependent on written communication and record-keeping across dispersed populations. County courts handled an increasing volume of disputes related to debts, contracts, and land claims, many originating during the war, requiring careful adjudication to restore confidence in legal processes and ensure that economic relationships could function reliably again. Infrastructure improvements progressed slowly, including maintenance of roads and bridges essential for trade, underscoring the dependence of economic recovery on physical connectivity and the ability of local authorities to mobilize labor and resources for public works. York's geographic position continued to influence its development, as proximity to fertile farmland and transport routes allowed it to remain a modest but stable node within Pennsylvania's internal economy, balancing agricultural production with small-scale manufacturing and trade. Political discussions increasingly reflected dissatisfaction with the Articles of Confederation, particularly regarding taxation and